Well, welcome back, folks. Today's video is going to be very topic specific. We're going to reassemble the carburetor for the Suzuki TS50 Gaucho project. I'll set up over here at the bench in just a minute and I'll take you through the steps. I'll try to use a minimal dialogue and just explain what I'm doing as I go so that we can get this back together in preparation for reassembly on the right side of the engine. Now this, keep in mind, is a rotary valve bike, which means the carburetor mounts on the side of the engine, not on the back of the cylinder, such as a piston-ported engine. So in order to put the carburetor on, I have to get that whole cover with the clutch cover incorporated into it and mount it with a new gasket on the right side of the engine, and then I can go ahead and put the carburetor back in place. But first we've got to complete the reassembly, so let's get started. I'm about ready to go to reassemble the carburetor. You will notice the towel that's down on the top of the workbench. I do that for two reasons. One, if you drop apart one of these small little pieces, the towel will help prevent it from rolling off and losing it. It tends to capture the pieces. I do roll the front edge right here and create just a little bit of a ridge or a berm that faces me and keeps parts from rolling off the front of the bench. I like a light color. In this case, this is really white because it's easier to see. So if you drop apart, it's easier to visually pick up on where it landed rather than on a neutral color that you can't really pick up on, such as this, with these brass parts. Everything's been cleaned before this point. Again, remember, this was a running bike. The carburetor was in very good condition. I believe it was cleaned by the previous owner, so I really didn't have to do much to it at all outside of do some superficial surface cleaning. Everything you see here is original. I did not have to replace anything, including the gasket, the ball gasket over here to the left. I think that was replaced by the previous owner. I did lap the mounting boss here, or surface, for the float ball on my surface plate just to make sure it's good and flat. Have my tools ready to go over here. I've already applied anti-seize to the float ball screws right here, as well as the ball gasket. I always use anti-seize or grease on my gaskets. I rarely assemble gaskets dry. I'm also going to apply a little bit of light machine oil. In this case, it just has to be the ubiquitous 3-in-1. Any light oil would do. You don't even have to use oil if you don't want to, but I prefer to use an oil on some of these pieces, as you will see as we work along. So what I'm going to do now is just assemble the carburetor. I'm not going to do any more dialogue than describe what I'm doing as I go. And this is a very simple carburetor. I have all the parts basically laid out in groupings of where they fit together in terms of application and assembly to the body of the carburetor. I'm going to start from the inside and work my way out. And where I'm going to start is with the pilot jet right here. That's one of the harder pieces to usually get out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of lightweight machine oil here on the threads like that. And I'm going to assemble it into the carb body. When you tighten these down, don't overdo it, just snug it up. That's the pilot jet. The next thing I'm going to insert is the needle jet. That's what this is right here, and that's where this needle right here will eventually, when the carburetor's all together, will slide in and out of like that. That's called the needle jet. And the same thing, a little bit of oil. Now we'll go down the center chamber like that. Just snug it up. Now comes the main jet. You can find that right here. This is the main jet. That will thread into there. Again, just a drop of machine oil. Gets threaded in. Flat bladed screwdriver. Again, just snip it up. You don't need to overdo it. Now we're going to put the fuel valve in. otherwise known as the fuel needle valve. That's these pieces right here. First thing is going to be the valve body. Notice there's a gasket right here I'm pointing to. Again, there's a gasket on there, and we're going to just snug that up. And then the needle itself, see that right there, goes into that chamber, or that hole right there, like that. Next comes the float. The float pin. Just align those two. Oop, slipped out on me. Now we have the float installed. Now I can't find a specification for the float height for this project. At least one that I had any confidence was accurate. So since the bike was running fine, I didn't have any fuel leaks. I'm going to leave it alone to where it was. Generally, my rule of thumb is if I don't have a specification, I try to set the float so that it's approximately level. And this one is, if you notice. It's pretty much level. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm going to call that good and not worry about it. Next comes the gasket. Now this gasket, because it was used before, is a little directional. I don't know if you can see. There's grooves right here, or there's a groove around here where it originally fit down over this part of the carburetor body. So I'm going to reinstall it so those grooves line up with that ridge. Like that. Again, this already has anti-seize. Again, the carburetor float bowl itself is directional. This hole right here I'm pointing to, right there, lines up with that tube right there. So now what we're going to do, put that over the top like that, and now add the float bowl screws. These are the original screws. They are not in pristine condition. They are serviceable. This is a JIS screwdriver I'm using here. These screws show evidence of a little bit of damage. You can probably see that right there because someone used a cross-recessed or Phillips rather than a JIS screwdriver to take them out somewhere in the project's past. Snug those up good and tight. Again, you don't need to overdo it. Just make sure it's good and reasonably snug. Next, we're going to install the float bowl drain plug, which is right here. See the little gasket on there. Put a little drop of oil on that as well. We're getting right down there now. What we're going to do here is install the pilot ear screw. That's what this is, and there's a spring. That spring goes right in there like that. And again, I'm going to put a little oil on that. The factory specifications for this is 1.5 turns out from seated, and it was originally 1.5 turns out. I checked it when I took it apart, and they're seated right there. So that's 1/2, 1, and 1.5. That's approximately where it needs to be. Last thing we need to do is install the slide. I have not taken this apart. I've left it together. It's clean, as you can see. There really was no reason for me to take it apart. We'll notice there's a notch cut in the side of the slot, and that aligns with a peg or pin down inside of that bore, so that will go like that. And notice there's a notch in the top of the carburetor aligned with that pin right there. We'll put that in place, and we'll just finger tighten that for now. That'll come off later on as I have to add the carburetor cable, the throttle cable, to the unit after it's assembled. And that's it. It's a very simple process. As you see, there's really not a lot of parts. There's really not a lot that can go wrong unless you cross-thread something and you don't get your adjustments right, such as your float height or your pilot air screw, which I talked about during the video. It's really very straightforward. Now we're going to move on in the next, I think, series of videos, reassemble the carburetor to the right side of the engine. This is a rotary valve motor, so the carburetor is mounted on the side, but in order to do that, I got to put the right engine side cover on with a new gasket. Then I can put the carburetor on, and we can get that right side of the engine and the clutch cover and everything in place before we move on to the rest of the project. That's it for this video today, folks. Any questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.